This video is a brief overview of Step 3 of the Living with Risk Decision Support approach. The Living with Risk Decision Support approach was developed as a way to broaden our approach to risk assessment and management so that we can better support our older adults to live with risk. The Living with Risk Decision Support approach is a four-step approach that supports a holistic, structured, and systematic review of an older adult's risk status. This training video provides a brief overview of Step 3. What can be done about the concerns? Options to manage risk occurs after it has been clarified as to what the older adult is at risk of by focusing first on what is a concern. In what context does it happen? What are the potential causes and consequences? And who is concerned? Each of these factors can help inform potential recommendations. Let's look at each factor in more detail. Let's start with who is concerned. Identifying who is concerned helps us understand who we need to involve in the problem solving, but also identifying who is not concerned can help us probe into why there may be differences of opinions. First, we need to understand what matters most to the older adult and what are their goals. Does the older adult value quality of life or participating activities over safety? Next, we need to understand what the caregiver's fears and needs are in order to provide recommendations that help support them. Next, if clinicians are concerned, have we assessed risk with a broadened and balanced approach rather than just by a gut feeling? This approach helps avoid unconsciously underrating or overrating the risks or overprotecting or underprotecting our clients. Lastly, how you are able to manage risk is very much related to your role and mandate of your program in terms of what you offer and what you refer on for. Next, how do we manage the concern? As clinicians, older adults and caregivers all define risk differently. It is important that the first step in risk management is to come to a shared understanding of the concern so that everyone is focusing the risk management effort on the same concern. Once the concern has been identified, the possible management strategies could be focused on ways to prevent the concern from happening, or when this is not possible, how can the frequency be minimized? Next, we want to understand, does this concern happen in certain contexts? Does it happen in specific environments, with certain activities, or certain times of the day? If so, can we adapt or modify these environments or activities, or suggest alternative activities that still meet the needs for the older adult? For instance, in Dr. Lee and colleagues' person-centered approach to risk assessment framework for people with cognitive impairment, they suggest understanding what underlying psychosocial need that the activity meets and suggest finding a less risky activity that would still meet this need. For instance, does the concern happen with an activity that provides love, comfort, identity, occupation, inclusion, attachment, or a safe and secure environment? If so, what alternative activity with less risk for negative outcomes could be offered instead in order to still fulfill the identified psychosocial need? What can be done about the causes of the concern? If the causes are impairment-based, what can we do to improve health or address the impairments? Sometimes it is the person's physical and/or social environment that is making it higher risk. So what can be done to adapt the physical environment and optimize either formal and/or informal social supports? If the concern is new and different, and we feel that is related to specific personality factors, what has changed about the individual's choices? Also, it is important to understand the older adult's strength in order to know how best to leverage them when addressing the specific concerns. When considering common causes, it may be helpful to have program-specific decision algorithms so that all staff are consistently offering the same options. For an example, an older adult could be at risk of malnutrition because they have difficulty accessing food, or difficulty with meal preparation, or it could be due to a lack of education. Or is further assessment needed by either a dietitian or a medical workup by a physician? For these common causes of malnutrition, what are the services and resources available in your clinical setting? What can you and your team do within your setting? And what and who do you refer on to? Lastly, how do we manage risk by addressing the consequences? What type of recommendations or interventions can be done to minimize the negative consequences and acknowledge and leverage the positive consequences? Additionally, a broadened approach to risk assessment and management ensures that both physical and emotional consequences are discussed when weighing out all the potential negative consequences. Here's an example of a concern of fires that happens in the context of cooking as the individual forgets to turn the stove off. As common cognitive impairment is suggested as a cause, strategies could include working up the causes of the cognitive impairment and offering recommendations to optimize brain health. The context can be addressed by adapting the physical environment by unplugging the stove, using a timer, or by putting up reminder notes. The context can be addressed by adapting the social environment, by engaging informal support such as family and friends dropping off meals, or by more formal support such as meal delivery programs. The activity of cooking could be adapted by recommending cooking with the microwave. When you're considering ways to mitigate risk, think about what outcomes are realistic and achievable. Are you trying to prevent the concerns or the consequences? Are you trying to eliminate the concerns or consequences? Are you trying to minimize negative consequences? Are you trying to share the risk for the consequences? There are times when we mitigate risk by decreasing one concern, but this ends up increasing the risk for negative outcomes from another concern. And lastly, when the client is capable to make their decisions, there are the situations where we have to support the concerns and risk for negative consequences. What is the process in risk management? The clinicians in the initial study of this approach wanted to mitigate the risk in collaboration with the older adult and, where possible, their caregiver. At the very least, they felt it was their professional responsibility to inform the older adult of their concerns. In the clinical settings where the clinician was able to work with the older adult over time, they were able to support the older adult while they delayed and waited for the older adult to work on the strategies to mitigate the risks. And the clinicians indicated that only when the older adult was at imminent risk to themselves or others did they feel that they could override the older adult's wishes. The clinicians in the initial study indicated that the clinical situations involving high risk of negative consequences caused moral distress. They found that they were able to better support the older adults' clients to live with risk when they could connect with colleagues. They valued being able to review the case for debriefing, for fresh eyes, for a second opinion, for problem solving for alternate ideas, and for validating. Lastly, in order to broaden your approach to risk assessment and management, are you able to implement a collegial process in your clinical setting for your more complex cases?